So why don't we get started? It is a real pleasure for me to welcome everybody to this conversation on what I believe to be a very important topic of our time. It's part of a larger discussion on how technology is completely upending the way that we live and work, and how regulatory changes can keep up with this process of change. Within that kind of broad context, this particular conversation will focus on e-commerce and jobs in a post-COVID era. And I am very delighted today to welcome some esteemed panelists for this discussion, who I will introduce in just a second. But just to give a little bit of more context on today's topic of discussion, lockdowns and social distancing norms have, because of the pandemic, are really changing consumer preferences, and they're tilting consumer preferences toward e-commerce. And so we're seeing this kind of rise in e-commerce that has very serious implications for business. And these implications can be positive implications and some not so positive for some businesses. So the question that we're really here to discuss today is first kind of the impact that e-commerce is having on the world of work, and in particular from a small business perspective. What does it take for small businesses to actually be able to participate and partake in this potential opportunity? Are they equipped with what they need in order to be able to avail this opportunity? Does the e-commerce trend as it unfolds create more opportunity than exacerbate inequalities between organizations, between firms? And what about gender equity, right? We've in the post-pandemic, actually we're not post-pandemic, but after the pandemic, we've now come across numerous stories of women entrepreneurs that have been very successful at starting and setting up their businesses and accessing markets beyond their local communities, even in other countries. In some ways, e-commerce has facilitated this kind of digital entrepreneurship that seems very promising in terms of raising female labor force participation potentially, and women's empowerment as they are able to generate incomes and balance domestic responsibilities. But there's also a flip side to that story, which includes things like, if women are working from home, are we now creating less opportunity for them to access public spaces? So is there kind of a flip side to this very positive narrative that we've all been witnessing? And how many women, and who are the women that are really able to access opportunities that e-commerce is presenting? So beyond kind of these very broad sort of stories and anecdotes that we're hearing, we know that the data is still lacking. It's too soon in the game to actually have a lot of data on how this e-commerce trend is unfolding. But to help us unpack this and to really get into the nuanced details, it is my pleasure today to welcome three very esteemed panelists, and I will go ahead and introduce them, and then we'll go in turn. So first we have Dr. Aruna Sharma, who is an IAS officer, a former Secretary for Steel and IT with the Government of India. Dr. Sharma, thank you so much for being with us. I have been following a lot of these conversations that you've been engaging with, and every time I feel like I learn so much. So it's an honor to have you here, and we really look forward to your insights. Dr. Avik Sarkar, who is a visiting associate professor for data technology and public policy at the Indian School of Business. Dr. Sarkar was also formerly with Niti Aayog, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Sarkar. I know that you've been working on this issue, but also within a broader context of technology and AI for quite a while now. So we look forward to your contributions. And last, but certainly not least, Ms. Nirupama Sundarajan, who is the head of research and chief executive officer of the Pehle India Foundation. Nirupama, it's always very, it's always very interesting to have CEOs of organizations, because they bring a double perspective, not only a research perspective, but also your own experience as these trends unfold. And to have you, who is definitely a very renowned, I think, voice on this subject and research on this subject, it's a pleasure to have you here as well. So thank you all for being here, and let's just jump right in. We have a short hour. So I'd like to first just understand kind of broadly, and Dr. Sharma, we'll start with you, about the sort of opportunities and challenges that e-commerce presents for small business specifically. So just kind of broadly setting the context first.
Very, very right. Like what you have said in the introductory remarks itself, that consumer behavior is completely changing. There was a smaller shift pre-pandemic or pre-lockdown, but after pandemic, the shift to e-commerce platforms for the consumers has shifted very drastically. And not only that, after tasting the advantage of e-commerce, even the non-traditional goods like metal exchanges, like trading about the equipments, now trading about besides goods, smaller goods or FMCG kind of goods and services. These are the new avenues that are coming up very, very strong as we are moving ahead into it. And if you look at it, the spread of network across is also now helping for people to taste it. The availability of software to work on the mobiles or smartphones is also making a lot of difference. And this has been supported parallelly with the spread of digital payment mechanisms. So with the digital payment mechanism, an opportunity to do your trading across just on the internet through the e-commerce platform has made a lot of difference. That is as far as the consumer is concerned. And if you look at it from the manufacturer point of view or trader point of view, suddenly it's like an opportunity that expanding their market from neighborhood to shifting it to maybe across the entire country or even trading into exports. And the results are quite visible in some of the sectors where they were able to explore new markets for their exports as well as domestically. So, in the sense, they are no longer depending on trade meets and exhibitions to introduce their new product or get a market survey and move ahead into it. So, I will put it this way, that future is e-commerce, and the e-commerce platforms is also helping them not just to trade but also help them to introduce their product, maintain their inventory, offer them logistic supports. So, in the sense, their attention is not getting diverted. So, if you look at it to the economy in particular, the slice in the pie is going to be an increasing trend as far as the trading goes in the role of e-commerce. Right?
Great, thank you. Dr. Sarkar, same question for you.
So I think Aruna ma'am has covered most of the aspect, which is also quite interesting. So we are looking at maybe I'll just pick up the aspects which she has spoken about. See, she mentioned about the customer preferences, which is definitely increasing. The customer spending potential has increased over the years, and that is also giving them possibly that extra income where they can go and look out and buy things which are beyond the essentials, which is one of the aspects. It is definitely helping better reach of products, as ma'am told. The other way where it is also helping is helping in the infrastructure aspects. So the government is developing a lot of infrastructure, but the building of the warehouses, the acreage of warehouses that has increased from the private end across the last 5 years is tremendous. And there are some numbers that I have only from the people that I know from Flipkart and Amazon particularly. So there the warehouses have increased quite a lot. So these warehouses, while they're increasing, they're also helping in the livelihood and jobs of several people. The infrastructures are getting made because we are looking at delivery and delivery options. So there are a lot of choices that are being generated for the customers, and also a lot of jobs that we are generating as we talk about this whole ecosystem. Yes.
Great. Thank you for that, Dr. Sarkar. Ms. Sundarajan, I'd like to now kind of ask you, we've heard from Dr. Sharma and Dr. Sarkar about the sort of positive opportunities that e-commerce is bringing, but I'd also like to go a little bit deeper into now looking at what are the challenges that are confronting some of the businesses. So, Avik just talked about the big warehouses. The big warehouses, Flipkart, Amazon, that means that there's a lot of distributors now that are going to go out of business, right? So there is a flip side to this story. And, while we are perhaps not in a position to say net, are we going to gain more jobs than we lose? Are we going to, gain more than we lose? I'm always dubious when people come up with a net win or a net gain. Sometimes, it balances out, but I think it's a bit too soon to tell. Nonetheless, it would be great to hear from you about what you perceive as being, we've heard the opportunities, now about the challenges that confront particularly this small business ecosystem when it comes to e-commerce, because unless we're able to talk about these challenges, we may not be in a position to fully leverage the opportunity that e-commerce presents. So over to you.
Thanks, Sabina. So absolutely right. And I think one of the points that have been repeatedly made against e-commerce, if you would, has been the impact that it has on your traditional retail stores, who are also small businesses as far as the economy is concerned. And there has been a narrative, a parallel narrative that has been present, which talks about how a lot of small businesses have actually had to close shop because of the advent of e-commerce and because there has been a shift, of consumer purchase behavior. Now, we can't really, as you rightly say, there's been no study really to establish this, in a hard manner to see whether there has been more job loss or more job creation. But the fact is there will be a certain amount of job loss that happens. While net, even assuming that there is a net job creation that happens, we still cannot discount the fact, and we will have to acknowledge that there will be certain job losses that happen. Now, the question is to what extent and by how much. I can only draw a parallel from an earlier study that I had conducted in a previous organization, which looked at the impact of organized retail, which is basically your larger format offline retail stores, and what the impact of those when they came out was on your traditional retail stores. There was a very similar kind of fear and a similar narrative by the same people today, who kept talking about how your small traditional kirana stores will disappear, largely because that has been the case in most of your developed countries. When your Walmart comes in, your mom and pop stores did disappear, and there was an extreme fear that this would happen in India. In that previous study, what we conducted through a very large survey, we found that the total number of closures in the vicinity of any large organized retail store was 3.4%. And of which direct attribution to the opening of the retail store, the large retail store, was only a 1.7%. Now, we can always argue about the veracity of data, the size of the sample, but it's still an indicative figure to go by. What we also found out in the earlier channel was that the Kirana is a very resilient organization in the collective sense, and they do use these opportunities of competition to kind of reinvent themselves and develop themselves. And I think that's what the focus needs to be. We need to understand that Western models of retail do not necessarily replicate themselves in the Indian context, and that the Indian consumer, even with the changing preferences of buying things online, will still continue to kind of, go to your regular Kirana store, because it's a very integral part of your ecosystem. And I don't think the consumer, and this is speaking from each of our own personal experiences as shoppers and as consumers, we don't really buy for an entire month. I think largely because our weather doesn't allow for it either in terms of storage, and we don't have that kind of infrastructure to store food in our homes. So usually you're running to, your Kirana stores for the smaller things. And once you enter, you end up having conversation, you buy. But the challenge is certainly there in terms of whether there is job loss or not. And I think with the advent of e-commerce and as well as the large players, the first segment that has gone is with your mobile phone shops. You do see visibly, as far as, if you look around, the smaller mobile phone stores that used to sell mobile phones no longer exist. They are out of business, they have closed. And most of the sales have either moved to your online platforms or to your larger, retail stores. At one point, it was the online markets that did take over, because most of your mobile companies were launching in partnership with an online platform. And there was a marked price difference between offline, stores and online stores. But I do believe that price convergence has happened, and it's no longer that, there's no that kind of arbitrage. But you see the impact has happened with your mobile phone stores. The question, therefore, that we need to ask ourselves is this trend going to be limited only to this segment, or is it going to kind of expand elsewhere as well? So far from our experience in terms of what you can look at, and all of this is only anecdotal, mind you, because we don't have hardcore data to support this. I don't think that would happen. The Indian retail market is huge. We have a very large consumer base, and no matter what, and no matter how strong e-commerce grows and what we choose to buy, the Indian consumer will always buy from different formats of retail, just as how the Indian consumer chooses to eat in different formats of restaurants, from your roadside street food vendor to your large hotels. It's a very similar kind of parallel to draw. And I think that also we must take cognizance of, but while acknowledging at all times that there is a possibility of job loss of certain kinds of businesses. And therefore, for us to also explore collaborative models, which may have not been considered ever in other economies, but it gives us the opportunity to pioneer these kind of models and look at how both your offline and online can work together.
Great, thank you so much. I think there's two sort of key points that, or maybe questions that arise out of what you just shared with us. One is, of course, there will be job dislocations. And then the question becomes, what do you do with those people? So the idea that you can just take workers from one sector and transition them to another is I think overly simplified in a lot of the discourse. So thank you for nuancing that for us, because that is, of course, not the case, right? Workers have different skill levels, different preferences, and it's not, anytime people are like, oh, it's okay, we'll just take workers from a coal mine and stick them in renewable energy, or we'll take workers from this particular sector and stick them here. It doesn't quite work that way. It's not a one-on-one. So the question of what do you do with people that are dislocated as these major transformations take hold is a very real one, which also then lends itself to, I think, a separate discussion about what kind of social protection systems and safety nets do you need. But that, and maybe a point two of this conversation can focus on that specific issue, a 2.0 conversation. The other question that you brought up is the study that you mentioned that you did, which sort of said 3.4% of the small retail businesses were impacted, of which half could be ascribed to the presence of this kind of large e-commerce entity. The question that brings up for me is,
Sabina, just not e-commerce entity, we're talking large retail formats. So your organized retail, which means the likes of your Big Bazaar and your large, those formats, not e-commerce, just clarification.
Okay, got it. But then, so what is the conduit for that impact? If it's not the ability to purchase from them online, what is the conduit of how do you isolate the impact of the presence of these Big Bazaar and so on, if it's not ascribed to the e-commerce aspect of it? What else is there?
No, so you have, if you look at any business, right, there is the state of economy, whether we like or not, the impact, the state of economy and how we stand also plays a very large role in terms of how businesses manage to survive. And in a country like India, businesses survive or businesses close due to a variety of reasons. Competition may be one, but even if one company is willing to compete but doesn't have access to credit to enable competition, now how do you attribute it? Is it the fault of the competition, or is it because of a lack of credit for them to kind of build scale and capacity? I think that those are the nuances that one needs to talk about. It's very easy to kind of point fingers at the large players and kind of say big competition is putting out small businesses. But the questions we need to ask ourselves is, are we providing an enabling environment for the small businesses to be able to compete in whatever manner that they can? And are we providing all that they require? And in a large amount of cases, it's not just the competition. It's also things like access to credit. It's about whether they have the kind of technical know-how. Are there people to help them with these? It's the enabling environment that is absent, which prevents them from competing. It's not the sentiment, or it's not the perseverance, so to speak. And I think that's what we need to kind of separate out. And it's not easy. In the study that I quoted, we asked them directly why you went out of business. And that's how we arrived off it. So even in those situations where 3.4% attributed, generally we closed businesses, and only 1.7 said because a big store opened and it affected my my footfall, so to speak. But there will always be an inherent bias there. And we have to take that into account. But as I said, it doesn't matter, because the reality is businesses were affected and businesses are closing. And what do you do with that population is all I think what we need to consider at this point, whether it's because of a large Chroma that comes out, which is a domestic organized retail, or whether it's because of an Amazon, or whether it's because of somebody, or a Reliance, which is selling online, doesn't really matter, as long as there is some way in which you can either enable the small businesses to compete and build themselves up and expand and kind of reinvent themselves where necessary, or find another avenue to kind of see what else, give them other options so that they know what they can do based on the skill sets they have.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. Which then takes me to Dr. Sharma. My next question for you is building off of what Ms. Sundarajan just said about providing an enabling environment for small business to thrive and to be able to not just withstand the entry of new competition, but also to avail sort of potential e-commerce opportunities. So there are these realities of what businesses need to thrive in general, and then what they need in order to be able to avail an e-commerce opportunity. When it comes to women-owned businesses in particular, do they need something different? Do they need more or less? Or what do women-owned businesses particularly need in order to be able to thrive in this kind of environment, not just as a small business, but actually avail the e-commerce opportunity?
Very right. Nirupama has given very good example when this big retail stores came up, and it did cause a disruption into the smaller shops. This metamorphosis is again going to have an impact both on the mom and pop shops as well as what you are going to have on the malls as well. Because many of the mall stores or the big retail shops, they have become hybrid model, and same hybrid model is coming to smaller shops. So this is a metamorphosis which is bound to happen. Many of them are embarking on the opportunities, and during lockdown they shifted on this model, hybrid model. So whether it was cooked hot food, or whether it was their skills or their handicrafts or their homemade things, it gave them an opportunity. And I put it this way, that this kind of a metamorphosis is bound to happen, where today, if you look at the e-commerce, it is just 4% of the market. It may enhance to say 40%, but 60% will remain as the old traditional kind of shops which are going to work upon. So in the sense, this kind of a change or metamorphosis is something, an opportunity when you grow forward. And I think for women, it's a very good opportunity, because if you look at the women, they may be very good in manufacturing, very good in creating, but marketing, they were dependent. So if you look at the papad business, the cooperatives in milk or cooperatives in papad, where now they can get the professional placing and much wider markets for them. And this we have seen it. This we have seen it in farmers producer companies. Now you can order your quality wheat or basmati straight from the various farmers which are putting there, instead of going for the branded names. So it has helped them. Many of the self-help groups are also attempting to go into the e-commerce platform for exploring beyond their neighborhood market or beyond their other markets. And when there is a hand holding by the e-commerce for the logistics and inventory maintenance, it gives them a leeway to experiment with their product, to get an immediate real-time feedback on the product and move ahead on this. So I look at it that this metamorphosis is an opportunity for more and more women participation. During lockdown, I found many women, they went into the cloud kitchen. They use their home kitchen, and the cloud kitchen, whatever they were good at, were supplying and were opening a new avenues for the market, which even after opening up of the market, they're continuing with it. They're getting advantage of it. Similarly, I found in remote rural areas, the women, whatever they were making, had found a very good market when they are moving ahead of many of the SHGs which are coming. But what is very important is that these women will need a lot of hand holding. So if we want this participation and for them to do the exposure, because they have to be made tech savvy, so you have to give them a little technical knowledge, a little marketing knowledge, which they have but then in wider spread marketing knowledge they have to understand. And you must appreciate this thing, that when they were working through the distributor network, somebody did mention that there will be sort of dismantling of the distribution network. If you look at the distribution network, if you buy anything from a physical shop, you will find that nearly 40% goes to the retailer and another 10 to 20% goes to the distributor. The manufacturer's share into the MRP is 30 to 40%. So whether you take Coca-Cola, actually the manufacturing cost is 2 rupees. And then you take the manufacturer's profit. And the rest of 10 rupees is sort of shared between these three. So the e-commerce platform is cutting down the retailer's margin to a considerable extent and passing it on to the consumer as well as to the manufacturer. So this positive side also needs to be seen when we are moving ahead into this, that they get a better return on price. And there has been evidence in number of studies where they have shown that the returns to the manufacturer has improved by stepping into the e-commerce mode, because they are getting a better share in the margin or better share in the profit margins, which is coming up. Now, what is the disadvantage in the small business will have to sort of work upon it by hand-holding them, by giving, like what I said before, technical assistance, packaging assistant, product description assistance. And this role, the e-commerce platform will have to pick it up. See, if you look at it, why e-commerce platform is important. You must have seen recently, WhatsApp has come up, sell from your shop, right? So you post your product on the WhatsApp and you send it to your market. The difference between e-commerce and this kind of market is that e-commerce is more like broadcasting. You need not know your customers, right? You are just broadcasting and throwing it in the market, and then like the broadcasting in the television, the viewers will stick in. If your product is good, they will automatically start sort of coming to your product. They will get attracted to it. So that is the difference when you are coming up with these kind of products. And when WhatsApp is talking about it, it means there is a potential of shift to this market to those who are not doing. And it is very important that they sort of rearrange themselves when they are working into the market, reformat themselves, because otherwise they'll get left out. Let me be very blunt about it, that there will be some shops, physical shops, which will continue. They have no danger. There will be other physical shops who will get into the hybrid model or who will graduate. There will be some who will be just sort of leave it to the fate, they will perish. They will definitely perish. And if you look at the alternate employment for them, then they will have to go. And as far as women is concerned, I think it's an opportunity where the marketing, logistic, inventory, somebody else is coming in to take care. Right. So they can focus into their goods, their manufacturing, their skills, and move in a very big way. So I think for women, it's an opportunity to step into it. I've seen that stepping up of all the legit papad thing the moment they stepped into the e-commerce platform, the market increased multifold. And now they are free from other things which they were worried about. So now they're focusing more on quality, manufacturing, packaging, getting feedback, more varieties depending on it. So these are the examples that we have. So I think we should work upon it as we move ahead. And like Nirupama said, if it is 1.7% which are saying that the big retail shop has displaced or where the reason for increase, then e-commerce also I think it's a big advantage.
Oops, Dr. Sharma, I think we're losing you. Is everyone able to hear her or no? Okay, so it's not just Dr. Sharma.
You got me till when?
We're losing you.
Oh, you lost me completely?
You're back now. You're back.
I'm back. To
Yes.
what extent could you get me?
So just the last 3-4 seconds.
Okay, the last 3-4 seconds was complimenting Nirupama on her study, where she said that yes, 1.7% is the one who placed a clear-cut reason of this big retail shops, and others sort of went ahead by saying by the metamorphosis. So 3.5 was not completely blaming it. I expect a similar percentage to be there when the shift is on the e-commerce platform. I don't expect a bigger one. Right.
Thank you so much for that. I kept writing down questions as you were speaking, and as I let you speak, you answered most of my questions. So one of my questions was about what are the requisite level of skills, which you responded to by saying, we will need to do a lot of hand-holding in terms of access to technology, in terms of basic digital literacy, and then have the intermediaries actually do some of the, help with or actually handle some of the inventory management and so on. And then my other question was, who does the hand holding, which then you also responded saying the technology platforms, the intermediaries would have to do the hand holding. So that leaves me with just one sort of quick question on that is, if we are relying on these technology intermediaries to do some of the hand holding, does it actually lead to any kind of asymmetries of power and, or potentially practices that wouldn't be as protective to the entrepreneur who is engaging in the e-commerce?
Like Tirupama also said before, and so did Avik, that the arbitrage is now being taken care of. So I think the arbitrage issue should not worry us. And let us be very clear, in any business, even in a retailer shop, which I think I mentioned it before in some forum also, the retailer margin decides what he places, which is an eye-catching shelf, and what he places in the background, right? So, like if you want a particular product, you will find something displayed very prominently, which will attract you. And unless until you are brand particular, you will not look for the other product. So, this is a common trade practice, but that can be taken care of because e-commerce platforms are more transparent. Visibility is there. If you find in any e-commerce platform that, and some e-commerce platforms are dedicated to a service only, like Swiggy is for food and others is for them, and they much depend on the feedbacks, right? Like the feedback of the consumer is good, then a particular restaurant will be more prominently exhibited or others will be done. And Google search sort of links, enables them to link to whatever new variety or new shops that have cropped up on the Swiggy platform, right? So when you're working on these things, it is very, very important that these hand-holding, being a transparent mechanism, can be checked if we find that some are getting completely ignored. or some are getting completely neglected, right? So it is better to check it than being the distributor's control, right? Let me tell you, even in metal business, the distributors were playing a havoc till they were completely disrupted into that business, right? Let me tell you, in steel, literally it had to be done. They were playing the havoc by not allowing a particular brand product reaching the consumers and another brand product reaching the consumers. So this, at least in e-commerce platform, it is being more transparent. It is possible. So don't think it has been an evil because of the e-commerce platform. It has been there in the business, trade business, being controlled by distributors. So you are now sort of disintegrating that, and here learning from that opportunity, and with the arbitrage consciousness that is coming up, I think it should not be a problem at all when we are moving ahead.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Sarkar, I'd like to kind of have you sort of pick up on this conversation, both in terms of the potential challenges. I mean, you've already discussed the opportunities, but the potential challenges that certain small businesses, and particularly women-owned businesses, might confront with the advent of e-commerce, and what, in your view, is the kind of hand-holding that they need? Who should be doing that kind of hand-holding? You know, how does this kind of interplay between, you know, additional competition, e-commerce, how does this affect small businesses and particularly women-owned businesses? And then after that, I would like to move into, you know, 1 hour goes by so quickly, but I'd like to move into a discussion about regulation. So I'll be looping back around to talk in more detail about e-commerce regulations and broader than e-commerce regulations as well. But first, Dr. Sarkar, over to you to comment on.
Yes, so Savina, this is a very interesting discussion. Maybe I think thanks Nirupama for pointing at the report. If you have that link online and if you can share in the chat, I think everyone would love to read it. So that's a request to you. The one thing I just wanted to pick up on the point that both Dr. Aruna and Nirupama also mentioned was the impact on the businesses. So there will be some aspect which might be closing down, but I also see that there is a lot of vibrancy in the Indian Kirana stores and mom and pop stores to exist. So I can tell you from some of my personal experiences from the type of things, like, so we might go and buy some of the bulk items from say Amazon or Big Basket or whatever we choose, but there are some of the things which are particularly perishable in nature, or they are very specific to a particular area and the local distributors distribute them well. So those type of things are quite interesting that these Kirana stores can specialize on. So one of the recommendations that they have to take in, and I've seen some of them doing that, and this I'm telling from my hometown, that's in Bengal, I have seen a range of Kirana stores which existed when I was a kid. And now when I go to those same stores, I see that some have closed because they have not understood the changing nature of business, and some have actually grown 5 times more, that they have taken on rental the next 2 houses because they have grown so much, and they are like within 100 meters of each other. So what I have found very interesting is that they have changed their product mix. They might not be MBAs from very cool colleges, but they have understood the market needs, and they also understood that some things these people will go and buy. Maybe the rice and the atta they will always buy from Amazon because that's a bulk quantity, you get good discounts there. But there are the small items which are very specialty items for that region that people will never buy there, and that they will like to buy on that day, just the day before. So there is a range of things that they can do just by changing the product mix. It's a very marketing term, I know, but just by changing the product mix, there's a lot that can be done. And also touch upon Aruna Mam's point, like I think they're also doing the same philosophy in their mind. She explained it in a very technical terms with a theoretical framework, like how the manufacturer shares, the distributor shares, and the retailer share comes into. I am sure the small Kirana stores also look at the same equation about what on what products they will get their maximum benefit and what the market need in that 100 meter, because that is their interest area. People beyond 100 meters will not come to their shops because they have another shop in that locality. So that within that 100 meters, what is the taste and liking of the people, and then mix things accordingly. I think that's a lot of innovation that can happen. How the ecosystem can help in that, it is very difficult to tell, because it's not at all a structured thing. I quite agree to the fact, like what we have been talking about, is that how these platforms can go on and connect with, say, the Amazon or Flipkart as their business model. They also already have business models how the small traders can connect. So that's definitely one option where they need to be trained on. But if someone wants to individually grow their businesses, remaining an individual, I think that sort of training also has to be provided. We shouldn't always tell them that, okay, your mechanism to grow is to tie up with Amazon or a big player like Flipkart, which I understand is a good way. But if they want to do things independently, can they have their own use of some platform or some mechanism? I think that sort of handholding will also be helpful, where they retain their local aspects and can remain independent also without tying up with a vendor. Given that this is very platform independent suggestion, I think here the local governments, I don't know if maybe the DICs, in the industry centers in the local areas, or the local traders association might have to play an important role. The closest that we can think in the current scenario are the SHGs, which Aruna ma'am hold. Like if the Kirana stores talk amongst themselves and form something in common, that will be good. Otherwise, we definitely have quite a good models which are coming from these big players, how they can bring the people on their platform. So that's definitely there, but we should also give them an alternative. We shouldn't tell that you must go and tie up with them. That has benefits, but people, if they have choices, they often like it. So like we also, when we go to a store and we are given choices, I think we'll like it. I think they also should have the option to either remain independent and flourish, or tie up with the big players and also flourish. So we should give them both the options. Yeah. That's what my take will be.
Thank you, Avik. I'm one of those people that actually doesn't like too many options. I find them too draining. Just tell me what, give me 3 options and I'll pick from that, not 500. I get very intimidated by 10-page menus in restaurants, for example. But that being said, my question to you is about, so all of your points are extremely well taken. One question that came to my mind is when you're talking about small businesses that, if small businesses are unable to adapt to changing preferences, and or they're unable to access finance or any number of things that small businesses need to survive and to thrive, then they will go out of business. And only the businesses that are kind of able to grow and survive these kinds of shocks, such as the pandemic, will then be able to survive. When we put that in context of jobs, is there a loss of jobs related to the economies of scale? So, now we only have big companies, and we know that big companies are actually employ less than smaller businesses. So if smaller businesses are going out of the market then and are collapsing, is there is there something to be concerned about, aside from competition, from an employment perspective? Is there something to be concerned about in terms of job losses as these businesses scale up, actually? Because they're able to reap the economies of scale. Maybe you need fewer people. Maybe you're deploying more technology. You need fewer people to do the same kind of work.
Yes, I think that remains a pertinent issue with any technology coming in, because you need lesser number of people once technology is playing an important role, and government again I think has to play an important role in reskilling. Reskilling is something which is not done well in India. We have NSDC which is aimed at reskilling, but reskilling doesn't happen. in the practical sense, and people sort of learn when they get a job, and then they learn the skills that are relevant to that channel. So I think reskilling has to be more not affordable because they don't charge much. It should be more seen as something that people will adapt. Now reskilling is not adapted much. It is seen that, okay, if you are maybe below 25 in that age range, then that is something for reskilling. If you are, say, in your, say, 40s, 40 plus, or say 35 plus, then you don't consider that you can actually reskill yourself and you have a lot of skill, and you can go on to the job market. It is more of a social thing, which I feel, rather than the capability of these people to reskill themselves. They do not see that if you have lost your job. Say I was running a kirana store and I'm 35 or in the 40 age range, I had to close down my shop. I had 2 employees. I will sort of go and ask money from people again to start some business rather than trying to reskill myself and get somewhere employed. But this is what I'm telling only based on my perception of things. I'm not quoting any study, but that is what my perception seems. And I would love to hear what Nirupama and Aruna ma'am has to say on that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think as far as the reskilling issue is concerned, and you know, the whole skills ecosystem, JustJobs Network, my organization, and also through the Jobs Initiative with Center for Policy Research, we do a lot of work around skills, and the whole, the whole skilling ecosystem is itself if we include non-formal and formal training, is roughly 11%, right? So in any case, the capacity for people to skill and reskill, at least as far as data and formal definitions are concerned, is fairly limited. Add on top of that the ability for people to move, geographic preferences or and geographic anchors that people might have that prevent labor mobility. All of these kinds of factors are huge contributors in people's ability to move between, from one job to another, from one sector to another. And certainly anytime you have shocks, whether it's the pandemic or technology that brings opportunities like e-commerce, where there is restructuring of labor markets, you will inevitably confront these challenges that are pertinent across, I think. But now, we're kind of a little bit short on time, but what I would like to do is to actually go into the whole discussion of regulations. And Dr. Sharma, I'd like to start with you here and really hear kind of your take on, are the regulations that are governing e-commerce able to adapt adequately to these changing market preferences and technological changes? Are they able to adapt adequately, and are they able to adapt fast enough? And if so, what is valuable about them, and if not, why not, and what needs to happen?
Very right. I will say that e-commerce is recognized that this is the future. It is an expanding zone. It is going to go very, very fast. And it is entering into different kind of sectors. Like I'm a vegetarian, but I suddenly find Lucius suddenly expanding its market, and it's completely an e-commerce platform product, where people use go and buy their non-vegetarian raw material. They are shifting to this. So government recognizes this very, very well. But what is important is what is happening in e-commerce, and let me say it very, very upfront, that too many cooks are spoiling the broth. There is absolutely no two opinions about it. That you have an IT department, an IT Act, then you have Commerce Department. Now Consumer Affairs have also jumped into it. Then you have RBI and therefore Finance regulating it. It is very important to have one parent for the clarity of regulations in the e-commerce. So it can be a combination of IT Act and the Commerce Department. IT Act because IT platform is being used, and Commerce Department just to see that things of arbitrage and everything are taken care of. So beyond that, there is no need to walk the path. So this is very important. That is number one. Second thing is the flip-flops. You have a press release of 2018 December. Then you have this draft of Consumer Affairs. Now, thankfully, that draft has been sent back and has been said that absolutely they are treading more than the what we have a business rule for a department. So I think that will be taken care of to a considerable extent. But then press release of 18 did create a lot of disruptions. So when in the previous questions we are talking of the small players who want to board the platform, they need hand holding. And what skilling is being talked about, the ideal person to give the skilling is who is doing the hand holding. They will know exactly what to do the skilling than a broad-based skilling for people to change the opportunity. Somebody may need in packaging, somebody may need in better production, somebody may have a market feedback and change their what to produce more and what to produce less, and honestly not create a dead inventory. So all this skilling will also come moment we allow this to grow and flourish when we are going. Now this press release have restricted to 26% of investment, and which the draft and consumer affairs tried to bring the related party, that's 2%. Then who is going to do this? Right. So if you have a third party who is going to independently deal in inventory or independently deal only logistics, they will have no interest as far as the business development is concerned. The stakeholder is the e-commerce platform. They have everything at stake because if they get the best of the produce to the consumers, definitely their commerce platform works. That is how it will go. And when you're talking about the regulations, then RBI, now recently this PAPG is something getting argued about storing your repeat payment data of your debit cards, because maximum population is of the debit card. Credit card is less. And then sort of restricting it that only the banks will hold that data and an individual will have to punch it every time. You will lose a lot of consumers from the e-commerce platforms and they will shift into the traditional ways as we are going ahead with it. So this is a problem that they are going to face as we are moving ahead, and that's a big, big, big problem. So therefore now, if you, like I said, too many cooks, if RBI is coming up with something, so data privacy is an umbrella, and let us not each try to define a data privacy. So I will not like to mince words here in saying that yes, in regulations, consciousness of e-commerce is there. Arbitrage consciousness is a good step which has come forward very clearly. But today we are suffering from this problem of too many cooks. We need an umbrella department, that is IT and commerce, and others, their concerns, they can put it in that department. We do have a mechanism in government where you have interdepartment meetings and you can put your concern that can be addressed in whatever is coming out from one source, instead of everybody trying to define. And this is what happened in consumer affairs. You must stick to the, like I always say, that treat e-commerce only as a platform. You understand? It is equivalent to a brick and mortar. Now, e-commerce, we are making them responsible if there is a bad product. Now, they are not responsible. They will have a mechanism to change that product or to arrange for a refund. But they cannot be responsible. Like your shopkeeper is not responsible if I get a bad parachute oil, right? It is the parachute oil making company which is responsible for it. So this consciousness has to come up when we are talking about it. So yes, the consciousness is there. But at this stage, a clarity is very, very important. Otherwise, India will lose the advantage, and the clarion call which the government has given to increase the MSME export from 48% to 60%, I see no other alternative than e-commerce platform for it. Absolutely no other alternative to accelerated pace if we want to achieve it, right?
Great. Thank you so much for that. Always a wealth of information. We're short on time, so I'll keep my commentary to a minimum. And Nirupam, I'll turn to you to please give us sort of your take on the regulations and everything that you've just heard as well.
Thanks, Sabina. I'll be as brief as I can and to the point. I think much like how Dr. Sharma said, she wouldn't like to mince words, neither would I. I think we've made a mess of our regulations as far as the retail sector is concerned. There's no polite way of putting this. It is an absolute mess because we've created multiple regulations based on different formats, depending on origin of capital, and all with this beauteous intention of saying we're creating a level playing field, and all that is done is create more and more arbitrage and more loopholes and more problems. I think Dr. Sharma has already dealt with the specifics, so I'll give it a slightly more 10,000 feet high viewpoint. We need to remember what the priorities for the country is. On the one hand, we're talking of digital inclusion. We're talking about moving towards a less cash society. You're talking about attracting FDI. And we need to see whether our specific regulations mirror these national objectives. And in the context of e-commerce, they clearly do not. And that's a fundamental problem. And we also tend to, and take, for example, the way we're treating foreign brands in India, especially the fact that you're constantly going after, let's say, a Flipkart and an Amazon, but do you see the government going after a Reliance in a similar kind of vein? They're all e-commerce companies, mind you, and they're all large e-commerce companies. And what the kind of impact that an Amazon, you're ascribing to Amazon in terms of what would happen on your small traditional Kirana stores, it would be a similar kind of impact a large Reliance retail e-commerce platform would also have. So why the distinction? Retrospective regulation is becoming an increasingly problematic thing. I always will say, and I will continue to maintain, that at the time of entry, right, we have every right as a country to arm twist, to lay down whatever our conditions are, but all of it at the time of entry. Give the option to every company whether they want to actually agree to these demands and enter, or whether they don't want to, but it has to be at the point of entry. Once they come in, if you're starting to kind of put in retrospective regulations, and if you're going to offer differential treatment for domestic and foreign, even though economic contribution wise, these people, your foreign brands are also doing their bit, there is a very, very bad signal that you're sending out. Then with what kind of moral right do we have to go and say we are a country that welcomes FDI and we will do well for FDI and it's a great place for you to invest? Where is the confidence? There will be none. And I think, which is what I mean by saying that it has to be in line with your national priorities. Much like what ma'am said about RBI's rule of storing data. You want to move to a less cash society and you're making online payments more and more inconvenient. Why would then I opt for any kind of online payment, including the fact that you're making online payment more expensive with the convenience fees and this, that, and all of that, than actually handling cash? Where we fall short on a regulatory framework, because of the fact that our specific regulations and specific policies are not aligned with what we project as our national priorities. And we also forget very conveniently when we make regulations that you need to look at all stakeholders. Today, if you look at some of the conversations that are happening, saying that your large platforms like your Amazon and Flipkart are foreign companies and they are eating into your small Indian businesses and you're affecting Indian businesses, I would really like to ask these people, how about the online vendors who are selling on these platforms? Are they less of Indian businesses? Are they also not Indian businesses? Do their livelihoods not matter? And somewhere the draft e-commerce policy that Consumer Affairs, which was clearly an overreach of the regulatory jurisdiction, came up, seem to have forgotten that very conveniently. In their effort to protect the small offline businesses, they seem to have not acknowledged the fact that you're actually, going after Indian businesses, domestic businesses, small businesses, women-owned businesses on the online space. And you have projected an idea that the offline businesses, for whatever reasons, are more important than the online businesses, even though they're all Indian, they're all small, and they're all important, but you favored one over the other. Now, why is that? And I think unless you have an understanding of how the sector works and who are the people involved, and acknowledge that while the platform can be foreign, domestic, green, red, blue, whatever it is, the businesses that are using these services, the businesses that are engaged are all Indian businesses here. So what you do when you go after them in an unrealistic manner and you create the arbitrage there, what you're effectively doing is you are actually killing an area of sale and a channel of sale for your small Indian businesses who use these platforms. And I think that's what the government seriously needs to consider. As I always say, a regulator or a ministry has a dual role of regulation as well as market development. And In this case, the regulation is great and it's bad regulation. Let's be honest, you have good regulation, you have bad regulation, and this is bad regulation. And at the cost of this bad regulation, what comes at the cost of it is market development, because you're stifling the market. And I think they need to take cognizance of that and find the balance where there is market development along with good regulation. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nirupama. I mean, as I'm hearing you talk about regulations in the retail and e-commerce space, I find resonance with regulation in a lot of other spaces too. So again, lots of food for thought for future conversations. Avik, I'd like to give you sort of the last word and just elaborate on sort of the regulatory aspect that has already been brought up, but also, what is the reach of regulations when business starts to span continents? Right. And sort of Nirupama mentioned the small businesses that actually sell on these platforms, the small Indian businesses that are selling on these platforms. If the intermediary is a foreign intermediary, what kind of regulatory complications does that introduce into the mix? If you have a perspective on that, or any other kind of aspect of regulation that has just been discussed.
I think Nirupama wants to take it because I think she has already worked on it.
Great, but go ahead. I mean, you can add your perspective on regulations. Then what I'll do is I'll give everyone about a minute.
Sure. So from my perspective, I think the regulatory landscape, as Aruna ma'am and Nirupama covered, is quite patchy. So they need to be simplified. And the simplification of the regulatory landscape is very important, because it is becoming difficult to do business, and in the long term, this might lead to a lot of investors not coming to India. So simplification of the regulatory landscape is a key, without going into the specifics, which Aruna ma'am and Nirupama has covered. I think simplification is very important there. There will always be overlap. As you can see, these are multi-sectoral things, and we have to determine who will take the charge and form the regulations, rather than, okay, now you have come up with 10 regulations, I will take another 5 on top of it, and out of this 5, 3 might be overlapping. I think that is a patchwork that is always happening. But I will not completely blame the government also on that end, having been on the other side just a few years back, is that a lot of the realizations come later, and the field is evolving. So, and another thing is that we do not get a lot of high quality research in India happening on a lot of this front. I'm talking about really good academic research happening on this front, which can tell you these are the policy alternatives that needs to be there. So I think there's a need for good thorough research on these areas, and the research should precede what is happening maybe 5 years or 3 to 5 years before actually it hits the market. A lot of the research that is happening is after the regulation has come. We are trying to do research and come up with things and give our recommendations. So the research from the academic community is very less in India. The policy research as an area in India is you hardly find any academic institution which are doing in-depth policy research. There are only a few think tanks that too mostly concentrated around Delhi which are doing that. So I think that aspect has to improve, where the actually policy makers will get enough juice to make their policies at the end of the day. I think that area has to be looked into.
Thank you, Avik. And I will say that both JustJobs Network and the Center for Policy Research are based in Delhi, but we work across the country. We work in states across the country, and in the case of JustJobs, across the globe. So, so we do try to bring policy influence and policy perspectives and suggestions and recommendations for policy. But certainly your point about elaborating research in this space as this phenomenon unfolds is particularly challenging because, because there also isn't data, right? We're all kind of witnessing these changes happen and are trying to suggest policy recommendations as these changes are occurring, given sort of the contextual knowledge that we have in the case of Just Jobs on labor markets and employment, in other cases in from the perspective of businesses and competition. So whatever perspective these different think tanks adopt. So we can sit here and criticize government and regulators, but I will say that it's a huge challenge, right? It's a huge challenge. It's easy to kind of be critical, but it's really hard to actually be making effective regulations in real time. Not to take away from any of the critiques that are very real and existent, but we don't actually have a lot of precedent in the current circumstances.
I'm having a copy of your book just beside me.
Well, thank you for showing that. Makes me very happy. So with that, we are over time, but I just wanted to give both Dr. Sharma and Ms. Sundararajan the last word, just to sort of wrap up here and kind of give us your final thoughts. So Dr. Sharma, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'll just like to say one thing. Let us be very clear what we mean by Indian companies. Any company registered in India is Indian company, right? And if we look at the source of funding, then FDI is coming even in Reliance, FDI is coming even in Bazaar, FDI is coming everywhere, right? So neither on source nor on registration you can term somebody as an Indian company or non-Indian company. So let us be very clear, just because of a branding. And so when we should be agnostic when we make a policy and while we are working for it. And as far as the detailing and slipshod is concerned, if we do a knee-jerk policy making, we end up into this mess. We have very good examples where policies have been drafted so well and discussed with all the stakeholders, and they are proven over the test of time. Even lockdown, they performed so well because of support of those strong policies. So it is very important that introspection is necessary. Instead of brushing it under the carpet, that discussions with the stakeholders before you pen it down or before you put a draft is very important. And let us not work on a disbelief. Nirupama and Avik did mention some of the apprehensions on which you build up, right? Instead of looking at the big picture. So that is very important. So I'd just like you to understand what we mean by Indian company and what we mean by non-Indian company, right?
Definitely. And I think, again, in the interest of a whole list of webinars that we should be having, I think the issue of digital taxation, taxation of digital companies is a whole other area, but that's very real in this space when these definitions of what constitutes an Indian company, what constitutes foreign company, are more explicit. But then how do different companies leverage taxation, and because that has a feedback loop in what we do with the people that are dislocated in jobs, from sectors that are going out. So all of these phenomena are obviously very, very connected. And we'll be inviting you all back for a series of additional conversations on the specificities of these issues. But Nirupama, I'll turn to you now. Your final thoughts.
I think final thoughts in terms of job creation, in terms of just looping back to the main topic as it were here. I think India needs job creation. It's important. And because we've lost a lot of jobs because of the COVID, we were losing jobs already because of the state of the economy. And there has been a constant narrative, especially with the incumbent government, of encouraging entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship cannot work without market access. It's great to encourage entrepreneurship. It's great to have them start their own business. But if you don't give them the market access, and if you don't give them the support and the hand-holding, entrepreneurships are not going to survive either. So the enabling environment is what we need to also concentrate on. And that's exactly what e-commerce does. So even while job creation may happen in the form of entrepreneurship, moving from what is just a way of supporting your life and as a livelihood into what is a full-time employment for you as an entrepreneur, there is a big difference. I may be an entrepreneur and earn just enough to survive and so that I don't starve, but that doesn't make me a successful business. But in order to move from just being a livelihood to becoming my source of constant and good source of income for improvement and lifestyle improvement and everything, I think e-commerce does do that bit by providing those market connects. And I think we should acknowledge that. And while we work on regulating and introducing regulations around e-commerce, I don't think anybody's against that, but I think we need to rethink what we want to regulate, how we want to regulate, and what aspects we want to regulate. At the same time, not forget that at the end of the day, it is platforms like these that actually help your entrepreneurs grow and will be the way to kind of create the kind of jobs that we want, especially given the erosion that has happened because of COVID. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I couldn't have wrapped it up any better with a better message. So with that, I would like to thank all of our participants for joining this discussion. And of course, thank you so much to all of our panelists for a very nuanced, deep, and insightful conversation. And we look forward to having you back. I think JustJobs is going to toy with the idea of launching a series and to have you back to delve into different aspects of the conversation on e-commerce, particularly in a post-COVID era. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.